Have you ever felt like you're operating on a different frequency than the men around you? Like you're in the same room, hearing the same words, watching the same reactions but processing something entirely different underneath it all? You notice the tension no one names. The motive behind the smile. The insecurity behind the confidence. And sometimes you wonder, is this a strength? Or is something wrong with me? Maybe you've been told you overthink. That you're too intense. Too analytical. Too detached. But what if that detachment isn't weakness? What if it's awareness most people never develop because it's uncomfortable? Today we're dissecting 7 dark psychological signs of rare intelligence. Not academic intelligence. Not test scores. This is strategic awareness. The kind that protects you in rooms where power is subtle and manipulation is quiet. If you recognize yourself in these signs, don't rush to judge it. Just observe. Because the traits that make you feel different may be the very traits keeping you from being controlled. The first sign is this. You observe reality without needing validation. You don't need a group consensus to trust what you see. Most people do. They scan the room before forming an opinion. They adjust their beliefs to match the emotional temperature around them. It feels safer that way. Belonging over truth. Approval over accuracy. But you're different. When something feels off, you don't silence it just because no one else is saying it. You've likely been the quiet one in the meeting. Not because you had nothing to say, but because you were watching. Measuring. Listening between the lines. While others rush to agree with the dominant voice, you were asking yourself, what's the angle here? What are we missing? Is this actually smart or just popular? That pause is power. Psychologically, it means you're less vulnerable to collective delusion. You understand cognitive blind spots. You're aware of distortions like the Dunning-Kruger effect, where the least competent are often the most confident. And because you know that, you question yourself. You double-check your certainty. You don't assume you're the smartest man in the room. But you also don't automatically assume the loudest man is either. That ability to think about your own thinking, to audit your perception, is rare. It's called meta-awareness. And it protects you from manipulation. Because manipulation depends on unexamined emotion. It depends on men reacting instead of analyzing. Have you ever caught yourself holding back an opinion because you knew it would disrupt the room? Not out of fear, but because you understood the social cost? That's not weakness. That's calculation. And when you do speak, it's deliberate. Measured. You don't argue to win approval. You speak because something is inaccurate. Because truth matters more than comfort. That's not arrogance. That's sovereignty. And most people can feel it, even if they don't understand it. The second sign is more unsettling. You acknowledge your shadow without shame. As Carl Jung described, the shadow is the part of you you'd rather not admit exists. The envy. The resentment. The desire to dominate. Most men either deny these impulses or become ruled by them. You do something different. You notice them. A flash of jealousy. A spike of anger. A thought you'd never say out loud. Instead of suppressing it or acting on it, you observe it. Calmly. Almost clinically. You might think, there it is. That's envy. That's ego. That's pride. And you don't collapse into guilt over it. Because you understand something critical. Awareness neutralizes danger. The men who are most controlled by their darkness are the ones convinced they don't have any. Is someone around you pretending to be purely virtuous? That's usually the mask. You, on the other hand, see your own capacity for aggression. For selfishness. For control. And because you see it, you can regulate it. Take anger. Most men fear their rage or let it explode. You analyze it. What boundary was crossed? What disrespect triggered this? Is this about now or something older? Suddenly anger isn't chaos. It's information. Data about your limits. And when you act, it's not reactive. It's precise. You reset the boundary without theatrics. That transformation, from impulse to insight, is psychological strength. But this is only the surface. Because once you can see your own darkness clearly, you begin to notice it in others. And that's where things start to change. The third sign is this. You're strategic about what you share. You no longer confuse honesty with exposure. You practice selective disclosure, not to deceive, but to protect leverage. Because at some point you learned a hard lesson: explaining yourself to someone committed to misunderstanding you is psychological self-harm. You've seen how certain people don't ask questions to understand. They ask to collect ammunition. They probe for weaknesses. They fish for emotional reactions. And maybe you used to give them everything. Your plans. Your frustrations. Your doubts. Only to watch it get reframed, minimized, or used against you later. So you adjusted. Not emotionally. Strategically. Some might label you guarded. Secretive. Even antisocial. Let them. You understand something they don't. Information is power, and power should be distributed carefully. Words are tools. And you don't hand tools to people who haven't proven they know how to use them. You read micro-expressions. Tone shifts. Energy changes. You ask yourself quietly, is this person genuinely curious, or are they bored and looking for stimulation? Can they handle nuance, or do they need simple villains and heroes? Are they capable of confidentiality, or do they trade secrets for social currency? That assessment happens fast. Almost instinctively. And based on it, you calibrate your response. Sometimes you go deep. Sometimes you stay surface. Sometimes you say nothing at all. Think about the last time you had an idea that could shift your position, a new move, a new direction, a new strategy. You sensed the environment wasn't ready. The room was full of cynics. Or worse, insecure competitors. The old version of you might have pitched it passionately, hoping to inspire. And you would have been met with skepticism, subtle sabotage, or polite dismissal. Now you do something different. You build quietly. You gather proof. You let results speak. And when the moment comes, you reveal only what's necessary. Not to impress, but to execute. That's not paranoia. It's pattern recognition. And in a world where oversharing is encouraged, your restraint is a form of dominance. But here's where it gets deeper. The fourth sign is unsettling because it turns inward. You see your own social masks. You catch yourself performing in real time. The confident tone you adopt in professional settings. The relaxed humor you use around friends. The detached composure you show in conflict. You notice the shift. Most people don't. They are fused with their personas. They believe the mask is their identity. But you have moments, brief, sharp flashes, where you're both the actor and the observer. You're speaking and simultaneously watching yourself speak. You're nodding in agreement while a quiet voice inside says, "You don't fully buy this." You're maintaining harmony. Is this me? Or is this conditioning? That awareness can feel destabilizing. Almost cold. But it's not disconnection. It's consciousness. You're seeing the scripts you learned early in life. The agreeable son. The humble achiever. The non-threatening high performer. Maybe you notice how you instinctively downplay success to avoid triggering envy. It was nothing. Just got lucky. You feel the words forming before they leave your mouth. And this time, you pause. You recognize the script. You understand why you adopted it. to survive socially, to avoid backlash, to stay safe. But now you have a choice. You can still be calibrated, but you're no longer unconscious. You can own a win without arrogance. You can disagree without hostility. You can drop the mask when it's no longer necessary. Seeing your own performance doesn't make you fake. It makes you dangerous in the best way, because you're no longer predictable. And unpredictability disrupts manipulation. If this level of awareness resonates with you, subscribe. Not for motivation. For clarity. Because most men don't lose power through weakness. They lose it through unconscious patterns. And that's what we dismantle here. The fifth sign is where the real separation begins. You see discomfort as a tool. Most people organize their lives around psychological comfort. They protect their identity at all costs. They defend beliefs not because they're true, but because they're familiar. When confronted with a truth that threatens their self-image, they distract themselves. Blame others. Change the subject. But you don't immediately escape. When something hits, a realization about your insecurity, your ego, your need for approval, you feel the discomfort fully. You don't romanticize it. You don't dramatize it. You analyze it. Maybe you recognize that your hunger for validation from authority figures isn't ambition, it's unresolved childhood inadequacy. That's not easy to admit. Most men would bury that insight instantly. Too vulnerable. Too destabilizing. But you sit with it. You ask, is this driving my decisions? Have I been performing strength while quietly seeking approval? That kind of questioning can shake your foundation. It can feel like identity erosion. But instead of panicking, you treat it like reconstruction. As Carl Jung warned, accepting yourself completely is terrifying. Because it removes illusions. And illusions are comfortable. But you've learned that clarity, even painful clarity, is leverage. Every uncomfortable insight makes you harder to manipulate. Because the more you understand your own triggers, the less someone else can weaponize them. While others run from the psychological fire, you step into it. Not recklessly. Deliberately. Because you know on the other side of the discomfort is autonomy. And this is only getting deeper. Here's the sixth sign. You use inaction as a strategy. In a culture addicted to speed, outrage, and instant responses, you discovered something most men never understand. The first reaction is usually the weakest position. You don't rush to reply. You don't scramble to defend yourself. You don't feel compelled to correct every false assumption about you. And that restraint unsettles people. Because they expect emotional reflexes. They expect ego. They expect you to chase the last word. When you don't, it creates psychological imbalance. Some mistake it for passivity. They assume silence means submission. They think you're too timid to respond. But what they don't realize is that you're measuring timing. Watching the emotional temperature cool before you move. Your silence is not empty. It's calculated. It's a shield. It's also a test. You're observing who escalates when ignored. Who grows louder when not validated. Who becomes aggressive when they can't provoke you. That data matters. Psychologically, this is elite emotional regulation. You've detached your identity from immediate reaction. You understand that provocation is often bait. And the moment you bite, you lose leverage. While others are pulled by every insult, every passive-aggressive remark, every social slight, you pause. That pause is power. Because in that space, emotion fades and clarity returns. And clarity allows precision. Imagine a colleague sends you an email loaded with subtle disrespect. The old instinct? Fire back. Match tone for tone. Protect status. But you've seen where that leads. Escalation. Politics. Exhaustion. So you wait. An hour. Maybe a day. You reread it when your ego is quiet. You ask yourself, is this intentional? Is this insecurity? Is this bait? Sometimes you respond with a single calm question that forces accountability. Sometimes you ignore it completely. And that absence of reaction often speaks louder than any rebuttal. The other person is left sitting in their own behavior. That discomfort teaches them more than your anger ever could. This isn't avoidance. It's dominance through restraint. Because the man who controls his reaction controls the frame. And the man who controls the frame controls the outcome. Now we move into the final sign. The most advanced one. You ethically integrate your dark side. You don't pretend you're above manipulation. You don't pretend you're incapable of ego, ambition, or strategic thinking. You recognize traits psychologists call the dark triad: narcissism, Machiavellianism, psychopathy, grandiosity, calculation, emotional coldness. Every human being carries fragments of these tendencies. The difference is awareness. Most people either act from them unconsciously or deny them completely. Both paths are dangerous. You chose a third option. You observe them without panic. You notice the impulse to dominate a conversation. The urge to steer a situation in your favor. The temptation to emotionally detach to gain advantage. And instead of indulging it or shaming yourself for it, you analyze it. Is this necessary? Is this integrity? Or is this ego seeking control? That awareness interrupts corruption. Because the most manipulative men are the ones convinced they're purely righteous. You don't suffer from that illusion. You understand you are capable of strategy. That you can read people. Influence outcomes. Withhold information. You simply choose not to weaponize it recklessly. In fact, recognizing your own Machiavellian streak sharpens your ability to detect it in others. You see the charming operator sooner. The subtle guilt tripper. The charismatic boundary pusher. Because you've seen those mechanics inside yourself, you're not naive to them externally. The flicker of narcissism becomes a signal to listen more carefully. The cold analytical thought becomes a reminder to balance logic with conscience. You are not free from darkness. No one is. But you are not enslaved by it either. And that separation is rare. It means you can access intensity without losing morality. Strategy without cruelty. Confidence without delusion. That is controlled power. These 7 signs together form a pattern. You see reality without craving validation. You acknowledge your shadow without denial. You guard your words strategically. You see your own masks. You use discomfort as fuel. You practice calculated inaction. And you integrate your darker capacities without becoming destructive. That is not dysfunction. That is advanced self-awareness. It often feels isolating. Because once you operate at this level, surface interactions feel shallow. Manipulation becomes obvious. Emotional theatrics feel predictable. And you may ask yourself, is this why I feel different? Possibly. But different does not mean broken. It means conscious. You've stepped outside automatic conditioning. You've chosen awareness over comfort. And that choice is rare. So now I'll ask you directly. How many of these signs did you recognize in yourself? Not the flattering parts. The uncomfortable ones. Be honest. Drop it in the comments. Because the more openly we examine these traits, the harder it becomes for manipulation to thrive in silence. And that awareness, shared and sharpened, is where real power begins.